You're listening to Impulse to Innovation. The Institution of Mechanical Engineers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Helen Mees. As a global community of mechanical engineers with over 120,000 members in 140 countries, the Institution of Mechanical Engineers has been at the heart of the engineering profession since 1847. The institution's mission is to improve the world through engineering by sharing the latest news, views and insight into the creative world of technology and the people that make it happen.
Hi, my name is Beatrice Udeh, B for short, and I'm the guest host for this Black History Month episode of the Impulse to Innovation podcast. This episode features a conversation that explores the intersectionality of race, careers in engineering, and joy. These are big topics on their own, and therefore becomes highly amplified and sometimes harmful when one's self-identities and protected characteristics intertwine. Today, we're going to approach with care and mindful intention, as these are themes that we don't get to share in this way. I'll be joined by some amazing people who are leaders in their technical and engineering fields, including startups, geeks, policymakers, and plain smart engineers. So why am I hosting and not Dr. Helen Mees? Well, Helen approached me as she was keen for the IMechE to celebrate Black History Month, but wanted to make sure that somebody with lived experience and a professional EDI background was at the helm to hold the space for the panel. I'm no stranger to the IMechE or to the microphone. I'm a former broadcast journalist and radio producer. I'm a former mechanical design engineer and was an IMechE member nigh on 25 years ago, chairing the Young Members panel for Derby and Nottingham in the East Midlands. I'm excited to find out more about the panel guests and get to the pulse of what makes them rock and find out how they roll during BHM and beyond. I have a couple of quotes that I want to share as provocations for this discussion. The first is the framing of some interesting stats by the Association of Black and Minority Ethnic Engineers UK, AFBE UK. Currently, around 30% of the UK's engineering university graduates are from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. However, these underrepresented groups account for only 9% of professional engineers. This is largely due to the barriers and challenges these groups face in recruitment, retention, and advancing professional development. With my diversity lead hat on, three things stick out for me. One, there is the language, Black and minority ethnic. Two, the stats, 30% of the university graduates versus 9% entering the sector. And three, the business case for a thriving workforce, recruitment, retention, and career advancement. According to Engineering UK, global majority individuals in the UK engineering sector face several specific challenges. Research has been done to quantify this, with specific examples of inclusion of people and inclusivity written into processes and policies. One, not being seen, and two, examples of different types of bias, such as the halo effect or conformity bias, and even attribution bias. All of these biases impact our behaviours and lead to discrimination even before reaching the workplace, let alone in the recruitment, onboarding and retention processes. The National Engineering Policy Centre, the NEPC, released a report this summer highlighting the importance of increasing representation in engineering and emphasising the need for a diverse and skilled workforce. And with a reported 700,000 people contributing to the engineering economy and Statista data showing that there are 540,000 engineers working in the UK, what does this mean when we intersect this with Black British history and global majority engineering futures? Welcome, everyone. And let me start off by giving a visual description of myself for access purposes. I am a brown Anglo-Nigerian woman in her 50s wearing green spectacles. I have short black hair, speckled grey at the temples, and I'm wearing a yellow sweater with a gold and a scarf as well, yellow scarf with golden beads on it. And my pronouns are she, her. And I would like for all of you to do the same as well. If you can say your name and give a visual description of yourselves, and you can share your pronouns if you want to.
Hi, I'm Myra Bana. I am currently recording this from my home in London. I have black wavy hair. I am brown in probably the Middle Eastern sense. And because I'm at home, I am in a nice, warm, comfortable hoodie.
Hi everyone, my name is Shafali Sharma, a brown Indian woman in my 30s. I have long black hair and brown eyes and currently wearing a white t-shirt. My pronouns are she, her.
Hi everyone, my name's Bridget. I am a brown Nigerian woman in my, wait for it, 40s, and I have short, what you would call blonde hair. I'm currently wearing a black top and black glasses. My pronouns are she, her. Nice to meet you.
Hello everyone, I'm Swati. I'm a brown Indian woman in her 30s. I have long black hair, black eyes, and I'm wearing a black sweater. My pronouns are she and her.
Hello everyone, my name is Nike Folayan. I am a black British Nigerian woman. I'm currently wearing a grey cardigan and I've got black reddish curly hair. And my pronouns are she and her.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So I want to go round the table, and I think the first thing that I'd like to ask each of you is, looking back to your younger selves or your university studies, did you ever think that you would be making waves in the way that you do now in the engineering sector? And in that same vein, what brings you joy in your career?
Very interesting question. And when I was prepping for the podcast, I was kind of looking back at my university days. And honestly, I never imagined I would be making such a splash in the engineering world. Back then, I was just trying to survive those late night study sessions, which I'm sure we can all relate to, and get my head around all those tricky equations. But as I dove deeper into my career, I discovered how engineering can really turn ideas into reality. And that's been super exciting. What brings me the most joy is the thrill of problem solving. I love tackling complex challenges, breaking them down, and coming up with creative solutions. It's like piecing together a puzzle, but with real-world impact. Plus, I enjoy collaborating with talented teams and mentoring others as they grow in their journeys. It's a career that keeps me engaged and always learning, and honestly, I wouldn't want it any other way.
Oh, that's amazing. Thanking you.
Firstly, I'm not sure I would have ever described it as making waves, but thank you for that interpretation. No, I didn't have a clue. I went to university purely to be an engineer and to be a good one. I have...
As opposed to a bad one?
I guess as opposed to an average one. That's probably something that we notice quite a lot when we look at minorities in any field. They tend to work really hard to achieve a standard and be noticed in a positive way. But the work that I do now outside of the direct engineering, outside of the solely technical work, I had no idea that I would get onto this path when I was back at uni. I knew things like representation were important. I knew that outreach was important. I didn't have a clue that working for initiatives like She Can Engineer, running a charity like a business, I never thought that being part of an institution, so I'm with the IMechE, would be such a massive component to my career. And in terms of what brings me joy, it is that breadth. It's the fact that I've got my community at my employer, Red Engineering Design, phenomenal place to work. I've got the communities at the IMechE, whether I'm there as a member or a volunteer. And I've got my She Can Engineer community. So working with varied people on varied projects and seeing the impact of culture, that's huge to me.
That's just brought something into my mind. I'm thinking about the fact that you specifically defined 3 places where you find community, 3 separate places, 3 elements of yourself in that way that bring you joy.
For sure.
I feel that's important. I feel it's important not to just, because we're not one thing. We are many things in terms of when we look at the intersectionality of who we are as humans. So not only am I a melanated global majority person, not only am I a woman, I also am a professional who works in the arts, heritage and cultural sector. And so those intersections play out in a certain way. And so I need to be able to find joy in places where those normally intersectionality, those intersections would define oppressive actions. But by finding joy in those 3 areas that you're working in and intersecting it with your self-identities, do you have to make a serious effort? Is it intentional or is it by accident that you're seeking joy?
I think it's by accident. I think it is drilled into me from a young age that you follow what you are passionate about. To a certain extent, you've got to be really lucky. You've got to have really supportive parents. You've got to have sometimes financial backing, knowing that you can afford to follow your passion rather than have to follow what will put food on the table. So for my entire life, I have been so fortunate in that regard that I could afford to follow what made me happy. And if I weren't finding joy somewhere, I could dig around a bit and find it elsewhere, and then get a bit greedy and decide that I want to find it in 3 different places. When you say intersectionality, I like it. It also makes me get to the root of it, which is individuality. That's in the end what we're all trying to celebrate. It's something that's deeply important to me, whether you're in the workplace or in a relationship or just spending time with friends. We have moved past those days that hurt so much. I cannot tell you how much it would hurt 10, 15 years ago when you would hear people say, I don't see colour. And I would say, but see me, see my story, see my friends' stories, see the individuality. It's what makes us special. And I think we're getting to that point where people are having those conversations and celebrating it rather than seeing it as something to avoid or deny.
That's a great question for me, because when I reflect back on my university days and when I look at my younger self, I don't think I could have fully imagined the path my career would take, or for that matter, the impact I'd be making in the field of biomedical engineering. Like many students, I was more focused on mastering the technical skills, on understanding the theory, on getting through the exams and all of that usually students do. But I certainly had aspirations, and I was very certain about the fact that I wanted to contribute to healthcare sector, and I wanted to contribute to improving people's lives through technology. So I was certain about that. But the scope of the opportunities that would arise and the specific innovations I would later be a part of, I wasn't entirely clear back then. So I think also we need to understand that biomedical engineering is such an evolving field. It keeps changing all the time. So looking back, I realized that the key wasn't necessarily knowing exactly what I wanted to do, but it was just being open to new ideas and advancements in my field. And that really helped me a lot. I was very curious. I was very eager to solve real world problems when I was at university. And that has helped me shape my career. As for what brings me joy, like I said, I was very certain that I wanted to make a dent, helping people, shaping their lives, helping the healthcare sector. So it's really the impact that brings me the joy. I know that the work that I do has the potential to improve healthcare. It has the potential to enhance the quality of life for patients. And so that is what brings me the real joy, being a biomedical engineer.
Thank you. IMechE.
So no, thank you for that. I think for me, I have always kind of felt that I had a purpose. It took me a while to work out what that was. But I always felt that I had a purpose. I wanted to study engineering because I thought it's something I was interested in because I loved television. And I wanted to work out how the aerial connected to the TV gave us the images. And that's why I became an engineer. Went as far as doing a PhD to find that out. But in terms of purpose and what I do now, I think it was just knowing. And I remember I used to say to my friends, I want to change the world. And they would sometimes laugh at me and just think, okay, that's just out there somewhere. But I always knew that there was something much more than just being an engineer, which was fabulous and good enough. But I knew that there was something worth more than that I needed to bring. So I've known that for a long time. How it was going to turn out eventually is what I wasn't quite clear about for a long, long time until I joined Wall Street.
There's no such thing as just
doing designs and so on and so forth, being able to see how my designs and the things that I've created actually is making an impact to how people experience the world. So yeah, that's what brings me joy.
And Bridget, what brings you joy in your career when you look back at the waves that you have made, your younger self, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, so yeah, tell us. Share.
Okay, first of all, I'm still my younger self. That has not changed. But
Tell us.
I get where you're going with this. I think when I was young, I had no clue. For a very long time, I had no clue what I was going to do. I'm grateful for having a dad who was like, he literally took me by the hand and said, this is what you will do. You will study engineering. I was like, okay, we'll do that. And what I found is that engineering, like what Nike said, it's a platform. It can really take you anywhere. You're never just an engineer. It is a base for you to do so many things. It helps you build your own personal skills, but also helps you build credibility. So I'm really grateful to have that platform. Come to making waves, like I said, I had no clue what I was doing. I was just going through the steps, making sure I didn't fail my exams, getting to the end of it. But I think when it comes to this idea of making waves, I would combine it with joy. What brings me joy is people. I like people. I think they're really cool. People in general, I think, are a pleasure. Some people say they're a pain. I think they're a pleasure. And when you can interact with people, learn with them, share your stories, share their stories, when you're just how you've lived your life in whatever simplicity or complexity is, how that can affect the next person, maybe inspire them and help them, that's joy. So the making impact is the connecting with people and, bringing joy to myself, hopefully to them. And yes, that's it.
I think all of you have shared, there's themes in there about, topics and subjects and people is at the base of that. And because that's how we change things. That's how we make people recognize that there are behaviors that also need to be addressed. And I suppose with my head of diversity for a national organization that's in the arts, heritage and cultural sector, I'm intersecting what you're saying with people and also with how we look at cultural competencies. That's knowledge and confidence as well. So those are those things that we try to do. And I think that's what you do with engineering. You actually kind of lay that solid foundation down so that people can pick up on those elements of behavior and impact. Nikki, I want to come back to you. I'm really drawn, I wanted to get your take on language and how it evolves. And as the co-founder of AFBE UK, and a person who is driving change in government and building partnerships across industry, Does the sector see your engineers as Black and ethnic minority, or as engineers who self-identify as global majority?
No, thank you for that question. That's a really, really good question. I always like to think about it in a slightly different way. I look at it from a place of outcomes. What are the outcomes that affect us by the use of terms or by the use of language? So in the engineering sector, there is a lack of diversity at all levels. At the entry level, for example, you see that there's an interest from communities of either you call them global majority, ethnic minorities, whatever you choose to call them. There is a real deep interest from those communities in becoming engineers. So for example, over 30% of engineering students at university studying to become engineers are from these communities. But then in the industry, there's only 9% of us. And then if you disaggregate those numbers into the different ethnicities in that space, you find that some ethnicities might be doing slightly better than some others. And I think that's where we need to focus on. We need to focus on the outcomes for different groups rather than the sum of all of the groups. And that's what AFB has been trying to do for a number of years. So when I go, for example, to an organization and you speak to them about things like ethnicity pay gap, they're quick to want to lump everybody together and say, well, actually, we're not doing so bad. And if you look at those numbers, sometimes it's just taking one person of a particular grade out of that number makes you realize how bad it is. And so I think that's what we in the sector actually right now need to focus on, the outcomes and how the use of terms, languages and stuff impacts that. Because I think at the moment, what is lacking, and the reason why a lot of people kind of talking about terms, what is lacking is the understanding of the impact when we disaggregate the ethnicities and we look at what's actually going on. So for the last few years at AFBE, we've been around for 17 years. What we have been trying to do is actually challenge institutions, talk to institutions such as Engineering UK that produces the report, the yearly report that breaks down the numbers, talk to organizations like the Royal Academy of Engineering to really, really understand at each level what the impacts of disaggregating those lump sums down and seeing what is actually going on the ground. So I'll give you another example. If you look at the top 100 engineering companies in the UK, you will find that there is only 2.3% of people of diverse ethnicities at the top of those organizations. And then you look at numbers, for example, you look at universities, and as of 2020, there were only 144 Black professors of the 22,000 professors in the UK. Now, if we were to put that number and add, all the other ethnicities, that number might look a lot better. But I think it's about nuance. It's about understanding and how we can actually start to change things by looking at the actual impact on a particular group, because no group is a monolith. And then the grouping together just makes it easy to excuse away what you're doing for X or Y by saying, oh, look at such and such, they're doing okay. Whilst the reality is that the majority, when you break it down and when you look at things like intersectionality as well, those results are not actually telling you what you're trying to say. So yeah, that's the way I see it, and that's the way that we've been trying to not educate but explain to our industry about the nuances around kind of grouping people together.
The Hamilton Commission identified several interlinked systemic reasons or intersectional reasons for the low representation of global majority people coming into the UK motorsport industry. These include industry practice, the lack of STEM roles in the classroom, and university recruitment practices. With the work that you do with She Can Engineer, do you feel that things have changed since 2021 recommendations and the launch of Lewis Hamilton's Mission 44 Foundation, whose partial objective was to encourage girls into STEM subjects and motorsport?
Oh, long question. So to begin with, Mission 44 is doing phenomenal work. It's a brilliant charity, and one of the things that I love about it is you don't have to dig very far. You go on their website and you see a lot of collaboration with other charities, other initiatives. And it's very difficult for me to comment on the impact of one initiative. And what I would say is we'll never be able to see the impact of one. If we did, it would probably mean there's only one, and that would be a bit of a disaster. So what we stand for at She Can Engineer, when we give the summary at our conference stands and stuff like that, we hit on a couple of things. Gender inclusion, like the she is in our name. We're there to close that gender gap. We are searching for gender parity in engineering, but we know that we have to do it with men. So we are not going to create any more silos in engineering, quite the opposite. We're going to bring men to the table. So it's about true inclusion. And the second part is collaboration. We like to see collaboration of different engineering industries, different initiatives, working together for this common goal. So I will start my official answer with, if Lewis Hamilton would like to partner with She Can Engineer, we would be totally up for that. So please do drop us a line. But the reason I really like your question is you've hit on the initiative that covers motorsport. And if you look back to, well, if I look back to when I was growing up and somebody would ask me, what does an engineer do? I'd have two answers. They build bridges and they're in Formula One. I didn't have much of an idea outside of that. We know that it's far broader, and She Can Engineer works to give that representation to all sorts of engineering disciplines, especially when we're talking to children about what engineering and engineering careers look like. But motorsport, Formula One, is the thing that taps into the public view. It is so visible. So if we can change what the demographic in motorsport careers looks like, we've achieved a lot already. And that is why I think it's a charity that a lot of people are going to be watching. And I really hope it is successful and paves the way for more conversations. Do I think things have changed since those recommendations? It's way too soon to tell. These things take much longer than a year or two. Engineering UK does phenomenal work collecting statistics, measuring impact of the global effort or the national effort or the industry effort, whichever level we want to look at it. Those statistics were encouraging between 2021 and 2022, a really nice leap. Then again, so much was happening in the world around that time. And the statistics between 2022 and the following year, really disappointing when looking at the gender gap in engineering. So I'm probably not very well equipped to answer truly, have things changed? But I definitely think we are going in an awesome direction. Because when you've got the support of high-profile people, not just the support, people like Lewis Hamilton valuing this work, it is incredibly meaningful. And it's not just about a charity taking it on, it's then about corporations bringing these initiatives in and seeing it as part of their duty to the industry to play a part in that change.
It's such a huge, interesting area because when I look at all of these different institutions that exist, and it's like, oh my gosh, engineering, we're so broad. There's so many different facets. And then just to look at one industry in particular, say motorsport, I like that you have picked up that motorsport. It's an elite area where people wouldn't normally find their home, especially global majority people or people from disadvantaged backgrounds. And so that's the same with things like rugby, if you're looking at sport, compared to football, compared to cricket perhaps. And you're looking at these areas and what can we do as individuals, and collaboration, definitely you've touched upon that, and that makes sense. And I suppose with She Can Engineer, you too have worked in collaboration. It's not, you can't do it on your own.
Exactly. We're constantly saying that we are there to complement the other initiatives that are out there, not to overlap, certainly not to compete. I think it's fair to say we were at a conference earlier this month and we were exhibiting across from the team at Primary Engineer. And I can't tell you how many people we sent over to their stand and vice versa. We are working towards similar goals and we're doing it together. And we are going to direct our partners, our supporters, in the appropriate direction, depending on what they are looking for at any point in time.
Let me follow up on that then with a question that any of you can jump in and consider. How can the wider community of engineers support the empowerment of traditionally marginalized engineers with specific reference to language, behavior, competencies, learning tools or styles, or developing organizational culture? How can those engineers support empowerment? Bridget?
Quickly add a thing in here, and from what I found, it's having conversations, being able to talk about it, because I think a lot of people, not that they don't care about supporting minority groups, they're probably scared. What if I say the wrong thing? I get it wrong. I don't do it right. But creating spaces where we can have those conversations and people are not judged for what they don't know already, but we can share that information. So I'm a huge fan of AFBE. We partner with them, the company I work for, and they really enable those conversations to happen where I can't do it myself, but we can bring them to the company and say, here's a platform for you to do that. So that's the thing I would say, start having those conversations. So people are not so worried and don't want to run away. Like Nika said, they don't want to hide behind a good looking number or excuse away what needs to be done. They can talk about that openly.
Swati?
It's a brilliant point, actually, Bridget has made. I think it's so important to promote inclusivity in a way where we create safe spaces, where we can talk about our mistakes as well, where we are free to talk about our mistakes and we are not judged for it. Also, I think inclusive language is super important. Using gender-neutral language, avoiding stereotypes, and ensuring the communication is respectful and accessible to all. I think that's highly important. Let's take an example. Like, inclusivity can also extend to how we present technical content. For example, if we use clear explanations that can help break down barriers for those who may not come from traditional engineering backgrounds, but actually they may have immense potential to contribute to the field. So just simple things like these, like looking at the inclusivity when it comes to language, like looking at behavioral changes wherein we give free spaces, judgment-free spaces to people where they can talk about, they can share their ideas, they can ask questions, they can, in the decision-making processes, they can speak up and they can admit to their mistakes where they are not judged, is, I think, critical to empowering the underrepresented groups.
Brilliant, thank you. There's something that jumps out at me, and I think some of those spaces, in terms of the judgment-free spaces, some people say, okay, you could provide that judgment-free space, but do people have time to go and visit that judgment-free space? I'm very, very fortunate to have worked for an organization, for the AMA, for like 8 years now, and over that time, we have tried and tested different types of working styles, and so we're now currently testing the 4-day week. And before that, even, there was flexible working as well. To provide those no judgment spaces, is there something about time, be there given time in your working week to be allowed to attend those spaces?
100%. I find that a lot of organizations talk about safe spaces, but they don't really want to invest the time that is required for those safe spaces because they are not, let's be honest, they're not prioritizing safe spaces. I've gone from talking about safe spaces in terms of ERGs to talking about safe spaces. An organization should be a safe space. I should be able to bring up what is actually going on with me, regardless of where I am. I shouldn't have to wait until the ERG meeting or similar to be able to talk about the real things that I'm experiencing in the workplace. And until organizations start to create those spaces in their organizations such that people are free enough to talk about their experiences without feeling that someone's going to say, oh, but I had a different experience, and so your experience is invalid. We're not going to shift to the dial. So that's the thing. I think, number one, organizations need to actually think about prioritizing it, investing time and resources for people that actually want to do this work, and also creating an environment that empowers people and rewards people for being interested in inclusion.
Thank you for that. And Swati?
I think, it's really important that within organizations, we promote culture where the organizations and institutions prioritize DEI initiatives. If we have this culture in the workplace, the DEI initiative, where it is a priority and it should be a part of their core mission. I mean, from working in the biomedical industry for so long, I feel there are so many organizations that they talk about, these initiatives, but this is not being prioritized. And this can only be prioritized when you're actively recruiting underrepresented communities, people from underrepresented communities. When you have training sessions where you talk about the unconscious bias that prevails within organizations, I think that's really important to have the core mission of companies where they prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion. And everything is interconnected to that. If we focus on that, then we are in a way doing a favor for the underrepresented communities in engineering.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, so I think in addition to what Nick and Swati has already talked about, I think one thing we can also potentially focus on is supportive behavior, right? When these kind of things happen, how are we modeling respectful behavior is very, very crucial. Active listening and demonstrating empathy help create an environment where everyone feels safe to express themselves. So which goes back to the point that was raised earlier around creating that a safe space for everyone. It is also equally important to challenge bias and microaggressions as and when they arise. And the onus is not just on the leadership team, but equally on every colleague, every employee in the company who can advocate such behaviors in a company.
I'm really interested in what I'm seeing on the screen here in this room around the table. We're talking in a panel and we're all melanated. So as melanated people having this conversation, when has your visual appearance ever given you cause to step up or shrink in your work environment? And this can be in the past 12 months or pre-COVID.
It's a very difficult one to answer because I'm not sure it has done. I would say you've asked about work environment, and it makes me think of the difference between the racism, the discrimination, the stereotypes, whatever word we want to use, whatever context we want to use. The difference between that and in the working world and in the real world is in the real world, it's blatant. It is children in the playground saying awful things. It is stuff on social media. It's the instigation of hate crime. It's rioting. It's frightening, and it's really obvious. You don't have to walk away from that situation and say, was that racism? In the working world, it's far more nuanced, and you're never really sure what it was. You are either left feeling suspicious or naive. And there's very little in between. So do you give people the benefit of the doubt? It's often impossible to prove. Sometimes there's nothing to prove. Sometimes it's completely innocent. So when you are treated differently and you're not sure if it's because you look different, it's very difficult to make your own way through it. That's probably how I'd describe it.
I think that's really interesting because you spoke earlier about family and or community. You spoke about these three communities in your professional life. And so I'm assuming that over the years you have found allies.
For sure.
Or people who will stand up for you or who will have your back in certain situations where you're finding those pinch points of perhaps harm in those intersectional spaces.
Absolutely. And this was probably the thing that I would say most often when doing like STEM outreach work in schools years ago. They would ask really pertinent questions, and you don't want to lie to them, but you also don't want to scare them off. And the genuine answer would be every time something tough happens and you feel a bit isolated, the saving grace is you're surrounded by these colleagues who belong to all the majority groups in engineering, and they've got your back. And they celebrate you for being you. And that's the most powerful thing. Through my work with She Can Engineer and running workshops for organizations, institutions, just conferences, just generally chatting with a lot of people, it becomes clear that some people love that form of allyship, that I've got your back, I'm going to step in, I'm going to say something, I'm going to protect. I seek out protectors in my life. If you look at my family, my close relationships, they are protective people, and I adore that. I have met people who approach that same subject very differently and say, I don't want somebody stepping in on my behalf. I feel like that takes my power away, which is a completely legitimate feeling. So again, it's about individuality and understanding people's preferences. And that isn't to say that you go into a new team and you do a quick whip round and say, who wants me to have their back and who wants to stick up for themselves? It means you get to know the characters and personalities of the people you work with, the people in your team, whether that is community A, B, or C. And you figure out how you would broach a situation with each of them as individuals. But for me personally, that kind of allyship, that protective allyship is something that actually gives me strength.
You know, I often think about that as to when I started in the engineering sector, and when I turned up feeling I was the best thing to have come to the industry, and realizing on a floor of 100 men, I was the only female engineer, and more so the only Black female engineer. And thinking that, well, that doesn't matter. I attained it. I deserve to be here, so I'm just going to focus and do what I needed to do. And over time, realizing that I wasn't going to be allowed to do that. I was going to experience everything from sexist behavior to racist behavior, and having to deal with that in a way that meant that I started to lose my sense of belonging. I started to lose my sense of value, and shrinking myself into a point being called a mumbler because I couldn't get my words out in meetings because I was scared to say the wrong thing. And going from that to who I am today, which is a very confident person. I know who I am, not having to shrink myself to fit into someone else's agenda, still having moments of not feeling I belong, even after 20 years in the industry. Still having moments of doubt as to whether the industry is going to change, but being encouraged by seeing many other melanated people within the sector that I can share my experiences with and I can talk to. So it's a range, and I have to say that it's much better than where I started from, but I think it could be so much more improved, because I still meet lots of women, lots of people from minoritized communities that still have these challenges within the workplace.
Shafali.
Yes, if only I had a penny or a pound for every time this has happened to me in my career. And I'd say there's been plenty of times when my visual appearance of being a woman of color in a male-dominated field has impacted how I'm perceived, right? Occasionally, it's led to situations where I faced mansplaining or had my expertise questioned, even in areas where I have significant experience, I'd like to believe. Early on, those moments could cause me to hesitate or question myself, but over time, I've learned to step up and confidently assert my knowledge. I have been very fortunate to be surrounded by some incredible people throughout my career, especially so now with
to see that and to add my likes to that and to re-share that, because it is about our voices are erased and have been erased for many decades and centuries. And in this country, women have only had the vote for about, 80 years now, less than 80 years. And so it's really important for us to, in terms of recognizing what you're saying, Shefali, being able to be acknowledged and to be cited so that we therefore become part of the canon and the curriculum that is being continually written and edited.
I think this question is really personal, and to talk about how my visual appearance has actually helped me step up or shrink in my work environment. I mean, it has definitely resonated with me at different points in my career in a very different way. I think there have been times when it depended on the situation and where I was in my career. I think that makes a huge difference where you are in your career. For example, I remember earlier in my career when I had just passed out from university, I remember attending this healthcare conference, and I was one of the very few women in the room. And I could feel that people were surprised to see me there. I'm sure some of it was unconscious. Some of it could have been unconscious, but you can tell when someone isn't expecting you to be in a space, especially in engineering, which is mostly male-dominated. So in that moment, I felt this need to step up for myself. It wasn't in a very showy way, but it was just to make my presence known. I wanted to share my ideas confidently, and I wanted to prove that I belonged. And although I would like for us to be in a situation when we don't have to prove ourselves, but sadly, that's not the world, the ideal world we are living in. So yes, I had to prove myself. I had to push myself to break those stereotypes and to break those mindsets of the men who were there who thought I did not belong there because there were not enough women, or so to say, women engineers in the conference. But on the flip side, I've had times when I felt like shrinking back, and that was like a time pre-COVID when I had just started a new project, and I was the only person of color, and in fact the youngest in the room as well. And I was always bothered if my points would be taken seriously, because when you don't fit with the typical image of an engineer, so you are colored and you're also the youngest, you doubt yourself, you start doubting yourself. And I did have that feeling. I did have the temptation to hold back my ideas, just to avoid standing out too much. That's what we do. Sometimes we don't want to stand out too much. And so it became a learning moment for me, really. I learned that, you have to push past those insecurities. I mean, if you have the ability, if you have the skills, if you have the knowledge,
what were the challenges for you? I know you've kind of alluded to some of those. Yeah, how would you describe some of those challenges in terms of your career and your experiences?
B, when I had moved to UK to study from India, and then later I built a career and I've settled here in the UK with my family, it's been a journey, honestly, full of both, I would say, challenges, but also rewarding experiences. So I remember, if I look back, when I first arrived, I had to adjust not only to new academic system, but also a different culture. It was a different culture altogether. It was a different way of life, different work environment. And I would say it wasn't always easy for me. But, each step that I took, I had to force myself. I had to push myself sometimes. But with each step that I took, it shaped me into the person and the professional that I am today. And one of the biggest challenges I remember I faced was finding my footing in a new work environment, in a new academic environment as well when I was at the uni. And coming from a different country, I was used to a certain way of learning, a certain way of interacting with people. And suddenly, I found myself in classroom and labs where the norms were very different from what I was used to. I remember the first few weeks as a student, I was feeling slightly overwhelmed by everything. I mean, I had to navigate the coursework, which was very different, understand different accents. So I had come from India to Scotland, and Scottish accent was very different for me. Oh my God, I remember that was one of the major hurdles I faced. But yeah, to understand different accents, and we need to emphasize on these little points, because these little points actually make a huge difference when students come from a different culture, from a different country. These little points make a huge difference. So it took me time to get used to the new environment. And there were moments when I questioned if I was doing enough to fit in. That's another word, fit in. You try to fit in all the time because you think you are different from others. And, you try to prove yourself. You try to fit in. You try to, make sure that you're similar to others and not different to others when you are actually different in certain ways, but also similar in so many ways. So that was about my academic adjusting. But this was a different ballgame altogether when it came to the work environment adjustments. When, like I said before, being a female engineer of color from a different country, it was all different for me. I used to think that I had to prove myself at every single point, when I actually had all the skills, all the talent that it took to be a good engineer. But it's just the mindset that you belong to, that you think within yourself that, I am different and I need to fit in and I need to prove myself. So I was hesitant, but I think if you embrace the difference, and if you think that you come from a unique environment where by facing different challenges, and India being a huge country, opportunity to set up my own company. I'm mentoring young students. I mean, I've got all the opportunities that I wanted. So although there were lots of challenges, but it's been absolutely rewarding. And to all the new students who are coming to UK, I would say, or coming to any other, or going to any other country for that matter, I would say it's important not to underestimate the value of your background. It's important to understand that in the moments of doubt that you have learned a lot back in your country, and to look at the differences from a unique lens, and to try and amalgamate with the new culture, and you'll be rewarded at the end of it.
Thank you. Shafali, I saw you smiling there when Swati was talking about Scottish accents and spending time in Scotland. So I feel like you have something to share there. But in doing so, could you outline your journey to becoming a co-founder of a leading tech business and your career in space and satellite engineering?
Yes, absolutely. And Swati, as all the things you explained, trust me, I've been there. Moved to Scotland, accent was tough, and insecurities pop up, and you just got to push past them and continue believing in yourself, believing in your journey, and believing in your own roots, where you came from, which, all goes back to India, your family, your parents. And when we take the positives from that and implement that in a new environment, it creates magic, in my opinion, which is what you managed to create. So, congratulations. And I think this will be a great kind of inspiring story for everyone. who wants to be in a similar position as you are. Coming back to my journey, I've always thrived in fast-paced, high-energy environments, which is why I gravitated towards startups early in my career. And that's something I think there's something incredibly exciting about the unpredictability and opportunity that comes with building something from scratch. So after I completed my master's in space engineering from Cranfield University, I worked with several startups within the space industry. And whilst I love the hands-on problem solving and innovation, I started noticing a recurring theme in my career or in those roles, that no matter how hard I worked or how passionate I was, the final decision were always in the hands of the leadership team. I didn't always agree with those decisions. That realization was a pivotal. It sparked a desire in me to be the one shaping the vision and driving the direction of the business. So when my co-founders now, Eddie and Mike, and I spotted a gap in the market, we knew we had to seize the opportunity. And that's when we took a leap of faith and founded Oxford Dynamics. And at Oxford Dynamics, we're developing cutting-edge AI and robotics technologies designed for sectors where precision and innovation are critical, such as defense, security, finance, and insurance. It's been an incredibly fulfilling journey, I would say, so far. Not only do I get to push the boundaries of what's possible with technology, but I also get to shape the strategy and make the big decisions that directly impact our growth and success. Being a co-founder means every day brings new challenges and opportunities, and I wouldn't have it any other way, really. The combination of engineering, leadership, and collaboration is what drives me, and I am incredibly proud of what we are building at Oxford Dynamics.
Oh, well done, well done. Would you advise global majority engineers to start their own company in order to increase visibility and representation, whilst also kind of reducing barriers to entry such as bias and microaggressions?
Yeah, very important question in my opinion. Starting your own company can be an empowering way to increase visibility, representation, and reduce the barriers that many global majority engineers face, such as bias and microaggression. However, it's important to approach it with both passion and a clear understanding of the challenges. One of the most powerful aspects from my perspective of founding your own business is that it allows you to set the tone for the culture you want to create, hopefully one that is inclusive, supportive, and values diverse perspectives. It's a chance to build a space where you and others can potentially thrive, free from the limitations that may exist in traditional corporate environments, so to speak. I also feel you are in control of how decisions are made, and that can be incredibly freeing when it comes to navigating bias and underrepresentation. That said, entrepreneurship isn't a fix-all solution either. Starting a company comes with its own set of challenges, including financial risk, long hours, and the need to constantly adapt. Whilst it can reduce some of the external barriers that we've been talking about on this podcast, it's not without its hurdles. I would advise anyone considering it this kind of career path to ensure they have a solid support network and a clear business strategy. Ultimately, I believe more representation at the leadership level, whether through starting your own company or rising through the ranks, certainly creates a ripple effect. It shows younger engineers that they too belong in those spaces and that their contributions are invaluable. Now, whether or not entrepreneurship is the right path, the key is to find or create environments where you can make an impact and lift others along the way.
A question to all of you. Where do you think the buck stops when it comes to the business case for being intentional in recruiting, retaining, and supporting the career advancement of global majority engineers?
So I would just like to say that I kind of think that it's really more about, there was a time that a lot of the things that we did at FBE between 2007 and 2010 were around what is the business case for us in terms of promoting having more diverse people, and actually turn that on its head. it just makes sense. It makes business sense to do it. It makes moral sense to do it. It's the right thing to do. So do it. I kind of think that the idea that, this might sound a bit arrogant, but the idea that somehow recruiting people from minoritized communities is you're doing some sort of favor, it's not true. There is the McKinsey report that tells you that if you recruit from a more diverse pool, you're more likely to have better innovation, better creativity. That's backed up by research by Royal Academy of Engineering that says that if you have a diverse team, you're more likely to get 83% more innovation, more creativity. So really, the buck stops at number one, doing the right thing, understanding that this will affect your bottom line if you don't do the right thing. So it's really up to you what you want to do. And three, understanding that inclusion and diversity is actually going to help you achieve your goals. And that means everyone's involved, everyone from employees to organizations, to also communities encouraging their young people to consider staying in these careers, but also to people that really want to be successful at business. You need to start thinking outside of the norm and start recruiting from as diverse a pool as you can.
I would say that, the business case for being intentional in recruiting or retaining, it's ultimately up to it rests with leadership. And it's very important to have leadership and senior managers who prioritize diversity as a strategic objective within the organization. It's super important. We cannot undermine this point. And also the HR and recruitment teams. I mean, with my own experience, having had to apply for jobs before or after I had done my master's and PhD, I think that the HR must ensure inclusive recruitment practices. The job descriptions and the interview processes should be in such a way that we try and build support for underrepresented communities. And also the managers and mentors, they play a crucial role in retention. When it comes to retention, there should be an inclusive environment where engineers feel valued and supported for all that they are doing. And that would help with the retention. And the engineering community as well, like all of us having this discussions like these need to be promoted within the engineering community, because all engineers, ultimately, it's all up to us to contribute by advocating for our peers. That's all we need to do. We need to challenge the biases. We need to foster a culture of inclusivity by holding discussions around these topics. So yes, that's what I have to say about that.
Then we're talking about allyship. We're talking about people showing up and being allies. In fact, stepping up, not being a bystander, but actually putting their toe, their whole foot in the water and stepping up. And Bridget,
I'm really going to agree with Nikki and Swati. The buck, I think, stops the top. It has to come, this whole idea of a cultural attitude. It starts from the head down. It's not only the leadership, but it does have to stop there. If the leadership is not intentionally putting that in the culture of the company, it doesn't make any sense. And like Nikki said, it's not just because it's a business sense. It's the right thing to do, but it does develop your business. But it also makes you think, why is it happening in the first place? Why are we cutting out people? And we have to think about those biases and where they come from and start to edit them out all across from the very young people so they grow up into that leadership positions. And I think as generations evolve, we're getting better and better and we're having those conversations. So that's great. Something I see in companies, as we know, is that they know that diversity is great, but they leave it to certain employees, like the ERGs. Let's get the people of color to handle their business. And it's not institution-wide. And so they go about running around doing really good things, but it's not enshrined in the company culture. And it's this really nice tick box or shiny thing we put on LinkedIn from time to time. And that absolutely needs to stop. It needs to stop being the responsibility of people of color only to get their own people to create that environment, but make it, like Swati said, HR and CEO and talent acquisition and talent management need to really own these kind of conversations and actions.
And ERGs, just in case people do not understand or know what that means, are employee resource groups. And they are something that happens within an organization. And they can be against any protected characteristics as defined by the Equality Act. But also you could have an ERG, I suppose, that is about knitting. So some people do have different affinities, and they will set those up as well within their organizations. I think you might want to look at Google or Amazon, and they've got quite a big selection. Facebook have a very big selection of ERGs if you want inspiration for the types of affinity that have been set up for those types of groups. Shefali?
Yeah, thank you. I think kind of most of the points, if not all, have been covered by Nikki, Swati, and Bridget, and I completely agree with everything that's being said, that the heart of the matter is it's not just up to the leadership team or the HR, right? It's a shared responsibility that requires passion and engagement from every single employee. And I'm coming at this particular problem as a co-founder and director of a business, right? This is something that we see. There are a lot of bystanders, there are a lot of people who want things. However, there's no drive or actions or engagement from those bystanders to actually make the difference in the way we want to see the world evolve, right? In that positive way that we're all talking about. So in my opinion, everyone must play a part in creating that environment where everyone feels valued, whether you're an engineer or not an engineer, right? They all should feel valued. Doesn't matter which minority or majority background you come from. You should feel valued, you should feel supported and empowered to share your unique contributions. So I do agree that the buck stops with the leadership team, which can then kind of figure out how they want to set the culture and the tone of the company. However, building a truly inclusive culture, which is what Bridget and Swati and Nikki talked about, is a team effort. When companies take intentional steps to invest in the recruitment and advancement of their employees, they not only enhance their own performance, in my opinion, but also become those, I think, Swati, you talked about it, beacons of equity and opportunity in our industry.
Thank you. And Bridget?
I'm just going to drop in a little comment here, just not off piece, and this, Shefali, this relates to you maybe more. As in, I like to flip the conversation on its head once in a while and think, I'm from Nigeria originally, and think, how have I treated people who have come into the country while I was in there? Did I treat them equitably? What was my attitude towards them? Was I biased against them as well? And so I got kind of open that conversation. That's just where right now we're sitting ourselves in the minority, so to speak. But when we're in the situation where we have the choice to make those decisions and act in a certain way, are we sure we're getting it right? We also need to hold ourselves accountable to that.
Completely agree with you, Bridget. And when you are in a leadership position, I feel there's a lot of introspection and reflection one has to do, right? You've got to dig deeper and try and understand your own unconscious biases, because that's where culture comes from. Culture is, yes, you're exactly right. I'm a minority in this country, but equally, when I go back to my country, I mean, what is mine? At the moment, I'm confused. Am I Indian? Am I British? We won't go into that discussion. But let's say when I go see my parents in India, I kind of think about these questions. When I see people who are minority in India, how are they being treated? What is my outlook towards those people? Not just mine. What is my family's outlook towards those people? How has my upbringing impacted my thoughts, my unconscious biases? So when I'm coming back and have that kind of leadership role to fulfill, I really have to be honest and accountable with my own unconscious biases. And that's why, otherwise you have a culture of, wondering why things are not happening the way they need to happen. So I completely agree with where you're coming from, which goes back to the point of accountability and honesty. I mean, I say that to, and not just me, my co-founders, we say this to our whole team. We are not invincible humans. Leadership teams also make mistakes, right? There's a reason we need support as much as everyone else needs support. If you're getting something right, have the courage to go and talk to people, go and talk to the leadership team, which I'm hopeful if you're in a leadership team, you would have an open mindset or outlook towards these kind of things, towards being more approachable. And if you're not in a team like that, maybe that's not the right place for anyone to be in. So that's where I'll stop. Thank you.
And I think that also goes back to the spaces where judgment does not occur, doesn't it? So by providing those spaces providing, an hour a month for every single employee, say, to be able to go into that space, share space, talk, find information, and not feel judged about asking questions. So maybe that's something that can be taken forward. I mean, Bridget, as a sponsor and judge for the IMechE Design Challenge, which took place earlier this October, have you seen any difference in the young people coming through the competition since COVID 2020? And how, or rather, what shapes their perspective of engineering as a subject?
Thank you, B. That's a pretty interesting question. It's loads of things to try and nail down in a short time. But what I will say, first of all, the Design Challenge, it's a competition run by the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, originally for first and second year engineering students to make a thing and test it in competition circumstances. And I've, as part of the company work that I do, I'm part of the competition. I'm the industry liaison. First of all, I think it's great. You can imagine it's the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, and you can imagine the kind of people you may see around there. So kind of stick out sometimes, but like you mentioned that thing about, does it make you shrink? Inside, I'm quaking, but outside, I'm like, I'm here. Blonde hair and all, just, watch out. So that's what I try and do. And I'm learning to stop the quaking on the inside. But when it comes to students, talk about like from COVID till now, I think what I've seen is, earlier there was a bit of a hesitancy coming out of that period when they're not so sure, they want to partake, they're not sure of their answers on what they've done, but that is gradually changing. And what is changing is the support they're getting from the academics who are really, looking out for their progress. So I think that's fantastic. I think another question you mentioned there was about the students, how they view engineering. Sometimes it's money. They see some engineers getting rich, or it's exciting. But I think what I'm seeing now is the fact that students understand, like Nikki said, that engineers save lives, that we can have real impact with the things that we do and not to take that for granted. And I think I'm beginning to see that come through more and more in the students that I talk to when I'm at the Design Challenge. They really want to make impact and save the world in the way that they can.
Amazing. This is what you do around this table. This is amazing. I didn't even think, because I'm in my 50s. And so when I look at you, I can't believe what I see. I want to talk forever, but I know that we have to bring it to a close at some point. So for this particular question, I wanted to know, what are your hopes for the future? And that may be one to answer in less than 30 seconds so that you can address it so you try and address it maybe from yourself in the engineering industry, or from the perspective of youngsters who look like you coming up or aspiring to come into the sector. Hopes for the future.
I'll wear my chic and engineer hat for this one and say, make us obsolete, give us gender parity in these industries, make it truly accessible, truly inclusive. And then there is no more need for initiatives like ours, and we can go off and volunteer doing something slightly different. Keep the community. That makes me happy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Less than 30 seconds. My hope is that we'll have these conversations enough until the time that the conversations are not needed anymore. And that's it.
That's deep.
Yeah. Hope for the future, 30 seconds, even less, building a future where diversity isn't just celebrated. It's the norm.
We love that. We love that. Nikki?
I'm hoping for a future where this is ingrained in everything we do, every aspect, not just a thing. It's like safety. I hope that this is ingrained within the engineering sector, like safety is, really. That's what I hope.
Oof. Yes.
All right. My hope for the future would be, I imagine a future where diverse teams come together, where diversity is celebrated, and through diversity, we tackle the most pressing healthcare challenges, because that's the need of the hour. Instead of focusing on the backgrounds and this and that, we must actually be focusing on the most pressing healthcare challenges. And that's what my hope is for the young people who are coming up behind us, to feel inspired, to push the boundaries of what's possible. And what they can even think is not possible at the moment, but actually it is possible, because that skill is within them. Yeah, my hope is just for them to all come together to celebrate diversity and to transform healthcare for everyone.
And on that note, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Take it easy, and we'll see you on the other side.
That's all for this month. In next month's episode, we will be setting our sights on augmented and virtual reality and how these immersive technologies are providing engineers with new ways to interact with the world around us. You've been listening to Impulse to Innovation, the Institution of Mechanical Engineers podcast. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear from you, so if you'd like to share any news or any feedback with us, then please email us podcast@imeche.org. All the information on this episode can be found in the episode notes.